Chapter 3. They rested and slept again during the afternoon, but it was a wary pair that faced the inferno of night. Diane was nearing exhaustion, not from lack of nourishment, but simply from the incessant battering she had received from the wind and the terrific struggle that every step required. Tim was stronger, but his body ached, and the cold, striking somehow through the inch-thick parka, had left him with a painfully frostbitten shoulder. By 2 hours after sunset, he perceived hopelessly that Diane was not going to survive the night. She was struggling bravely, but she was unequal to the effort. She was weakening, the pitiless wind kept lashing her to her knees, and each time she rose more slowly, leaned more heavily on Tim's supporting arm. All too quickly came the moment he had foreseen, with despairing heart, when she did not rise at all. He crouched beside her. Tears misted his goggles as he distinguished her words above the screaming of the blast. "You go on, Tim," she murmured. She gestured toward the bag on her throat. "Take the flame orchids and leave me." Tim made no answer, but cradled her tired body in his arms, shielding her as best he could from the furious winds. He thought desperately. To remain here was quick death. At least he might carry Diane to some more sheltered spot where they could sink more slowly into the fatal sleep of cold. To leave her was unthinkable. She knew that too, but it had been a brave offer to make. She clung weakly to him as he lifted her. He staggered a dozen steps before the wind toppled him, and the last struggle brought him to the lee of a low hillock. He dropped behind it and gathered the girl into his arms to wait for the cold to do its work. He stared hopelessly ahead. The wild splendor of a Titanian night was before him, with the icy stars glittering on cold and glassy peaks. Just beyond their hillock stretched the smooth surface of a wind-swept glacier, and here and there were the crystalline bubbles of the ice ants. The ice ants! Lucky little creatures! He remembered Young's description of them in the book at the shack. Within those domes it was warm. The temperature was above 40. He stared at them, fragile and yet resisting that colossal wind. He knew why. It was their ovoid shape, the same principle that enables an egg to resist the greatest pressure on its two ends. No one can break an egg by squeezing it endways. Suddenly he started. A hope! He murmured a word to Diane, lifted her, and staggered out on the mirror surface of the ice. There was a dome large enough, fully 6 feet across. He circled to the lee side and kicked a hole in the glittering roundness. Diane crawled weakly through. He followed, crouching beside her in the dusk. Would it work? He gave a long cry of relief as he perceived the scurrying 3-inch figures of ice ants, saw them patching the dome with crystal fragments. Steam misted his non-frosting goggles. He drew Diane against him and then opened his visor. Warm air. It was like balm after the bitter air without. It was musty, perhaps, but warm. He opened Diane's. She was sleeping in exhaustion and never stirred as he uncovered her pale, drawn features. His eyes grew accustomed to the gloomy starlight that filtered through the dome. He could see the ice ants, little 3-legged, ruddy balls that run about with a galloping motion. They weren't ants at all, of course, nor even insects in the terrestrial sense. Young had named them ants because they lived in ant-like colonies. Tim saw the 2 holes that pierced the saucer-like floor. Through one, he knew, warm air came up from the mysterious hive below, and the other drained away the melting water of the dome. The dome that would grow until it burst, but the ants didn't care. They'd sense the bursting point and have a new dome already started above the holes. For a time he watched them. They paid no attention at all to the intruders, whose rubber suits offered nothing edible. They were semi-civilized little creatures. He observed them curiously as they scraped a gray mold from the ice, loaded it on tiny sledges that he recognized as leaves of the whiplash tree, and tugged the load to one of the holes, dumping it in, presumably to a handling crew below. And after a while he fell asleep, and precious time trickled away. Hours later, something awakened him to daylight. He sat up. He had been lying with his head pillowed on his arm to keep his face from the water, and he rubbed the half-paralyzed limb ruefully as he stared about. Diane was still sleeping, but her face was more peaceful, more rested. He smiled gently down on her, and suddenly a flicker of motion caught his eye, and at the same time a flash of brilliance. The first was only an ice ant scurrying across the rubber of her parka. The flash was, he started violently, it was a flame orchid rolling sluggishly in the stream of water to the vent. And there went another. The ants had cut and carried away for food the little leather bag exposed on Diane's breast by the opening of her visor. He snatched the rolling gem of flame from the trickling water and searched desperately for the others. No use. Of their 18 precious ovoids, he had retrieved exactly one, the small but perfect one for which they had traded the clock. He gazed in utter despondency at the flaming little egg for which they had risked and probably lost everything. Diane stirred, sat up. She saw at once the consternation in his face. "Tim," she cried, "what's wrong now?" He told her. "It's my fault," he concluded grimly. "I opened your suit. I should have foreseen this." He slipped the lone gem into his left gauntlet, where it nestled against his palm. "It's nothing, Tim," said Diane softly. "What use would all 18 be to us, or 100? We might as well die with one as with all of them." He did not answer directly. He said, "Even one will be enough if we get back. Perhaps 18 would have glutted the market. Perhaps we'll get almost as much for one as we would have for all." That was a lie, of course. Other traders would be increasing the supply, but it served to distract her mind. Tim noticed then that the ice ants were busy around the 2 vents at the center. They were building an inner dome. The crystal egg above them, now 8 feet through, was about to crack. He saw it coming, and they closed their visors. There was a jagged streak of light on the west, and suddenly, with a glistening of fragments, the walls collapsed and went spinning away over the icy floor, and the wind howled down upon them, nearly flattening them to the glacier. It began to thrust them over the ice. They slid and crawled their way to the jagged crags beyond. Diane was strong again. Her young body recovered quickly. In a momentary shelter, he noticed something queer about the light and glanced up to see gigantic Saturn almost half obscuring the sun. He remembered then. This was the last day. For 72 hours there would be night. And night fell far too quickly. Sunset came with the red disk 3/4 obscured, and the bitter cold swept out of the west with a horde of ice ghosts whose sharp needles clogged the filters of their masks and forced them to shake them out time after time. The temperature had never been higher than 40 below all day, and the night air, coming after that cold day, dropped rapidly to 100 below. And even the warming filters could not prevent that frigid air from burning in their lungs like searing flame. Tim sought desperately for an ice ant bubble. Those large enough were rare, and when at last he found one, it was already too large, and the ice ants didn't trouble to repair the hole he kicked, but set at once to build a new dome. In half an hour the thing collapsed, and they were driven on. Somehow they survived the night, and dawn on the 4th day found them staggering all but helpless into the lee of a cliff. They stared hopelessly at that strange, sunless, Saturn-lighted dawn that brought so little warmth. An hour after the rising of the eclipsed sun, Tim glanced at his wrist thermometer to find the temperature risen only to 70 below. They ate some chocolate, but each bite was a burning pain for the moment that their visors were open, and the chocolate itself was numbing cold. When numbness and drowsiness began to attack his limbs, Tim forced Diane to rise, and they struggled on. Day was no better than night now, except for the cold Saturn light. The wind battered them more fiercely than ever. It was scarcely mid-afternoon when Diane, with a faintly audible moan, collapsed to her knees and could not rise. Tim stared frantically about for an ice bubble. At last, far over to the right, he saw a small one, 3 feet through, perhaps, but big enough for Diane. He could not carry her. He took her shoulders and dragged her painfully to it. She managed to creep warily in, and he warned her to sleep with her visor closed, lest the ants attack her face. A quarter of a mile downwind, he found one for himself. It was the collapse of the bubble that wakened him. It was night again, a horrible, shrieking, howling, blasting night, when the temperature on his thermometer showed 140 below. Stark fear gripped him. If Diane's shelter had fallen... He fought his way madly against the wind to the spot and shouted in relief. The dome had grown, but still stood. He kicked his way in to find Diane trembling and pallid. She had feared him lost or dead. It was almost dawn before the shelter collapsed. Strangely, that day was easier. It was bitterly cold, but they had reached the foothills of the mountains of the damned, and ice-covered crags offered shelter from the winds. Diane's strength held better. They made the best progress they had yet achieved. But that meant little now, for there before them, white and glittering and cold, loomed the range of mountains, and Tim despaired when he looked at them. Just beyond, perhaps 25 miles away, lay Nivea and safety, but how were they ever to cross those needle peaks? Diane was still on her feet at nightfall. Tim left her standing in the shelter of a bank of ice and set out to find an ant bubble. But this time he failed. He found only a few tiny 6-inch domes. There was nothing that offered refuge from a night that promised to be fiercer than any he had seen. He returned at last in despair. "We'll have to move farther," he told her. Her grave, wary eyes frightened him. "No matter," she said quietly. "We'll never cross the mountains of the damned, Tim, but I love you." They moved on. The night dropped quickly to 140 below, and their limbs turned numb and slow to respond. Ice ghosts whirred past them. Cliffs quaked and rumbled. In half an hour they were both nearing exhaustion, and no crystal shelter appeared. In the lee of a ridge, Diane paused, swaying against him. "No use, Tim," she murmured. "I'd rather die here than fight longer. I can't." She let herself sink to the ice, and that action saved their lives. Tim bent over her, and as he did, a black shadow and glistening beak cleaved the air where his head had been. A knife-kite. Its screech of anger drifted faintly back as it whirled away on that 100-mile wind. "You see," said the girl, "it's hopeless."